Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start, let me ask you something. How many times have you walked past an old man fixing shoes, or bagging groceries, or sitting alone in a diner booth, and never once wondered who he used to be? Tonight's story is about a 58-year-old man whose wife walked out with everything he had, and left him with an old army duffel bag and a sentence I still can't repeat without getting angry. It's about the $90 a pawnbroker paid him for the only things he had left, his service medals, and about what that pawnbroker saw engraved on the back of one of them that made him stand up, lock the front door, and make a phone call that reached all the way to the Pentagon. This story is about betrayal, sure. We do betrayal on this channel. But it's really about the debts that never expire. The kind 31 men had been quietly paying for 35 years, waiting for one man to come out of hiding. Some secrets rot a marriage. Other secrets, the good kind, wait patiently in a sealed envelope in a locked room in Washington. Stay with me. This one pays off. Here's the story. The morning Arthur Kimbrell turned 58, he stood in the kitchen of a house that had his sweat in every board and his name on none of the paper, and he made coffee for a woman who had already decided to leave him. He didn't know that yet. He knew the way you know weather, a pressure behind the eyes, a stillness before something breaks. Everyone in Halbert, Missouri, knew Art Kimbrell the same way. He was the cobbler on Decatur Street, the quiet man with forearms like dock rope who could bring a dead pair of work boots back to life for $11, who resold the sheriff's boots and the waitress's clogs, who fixed the strap on a kid's backpack for free and said don't mention it, and meant it, don't mention it. 30 years behind that counter. He liked the work because leather didn't lie. You could read a man's whole life in his heels, where the wear fell, where the weight went. Art could fix anything that carried a person, except, as it turned out, his own marriage. He had married Cheryl Otten in 1995, when she was the prettiest teller at Halbert Savings, and he was a man who'd come home from someplace he never talked about, with a duffel bag, a limp that showed up in cold weather, and a habit of sitting where he could see the door. She used to say his silence was mysterious. Somewhere around year 10, she started saying it was pathetic. There were no children. Cheryl said you don't have kids with a shoe repairman, you have exits. She said it like a joke at dinner parties. Nobody laughed harder than her friend from the country club, a silver-haired financial advisor named Gordon Spear. Spear ran a firm 2 counties over called Patriot Legacy Advisors, and his billboards were everywhere that year. An eagle, a flag, a promise. Your service earned it. We protect it. He wore a little enamel flag pin, called Every Man Warrior, and had a handshake like a folded newspaper. He'd been advising Cheryl for 6 years. The advising happened at lunch, and at a lake house, and in a hotel in Branson with a jacuzzi tub, and by the time Art understood any of it, the advising had quietly moved everything, the savings, the retirement account, even the building on Decatur Street where Art's shop had sat for 30 years, into places with Spear's fingerprints and Cheryl's signature. The shop went first, a notice on the glass in March. The building had been acquired by an LLC nobody in town had heard of. Rent tripled effective immediately. Art stood on the sidewalk reading it, with his key still in his hand. He was 57 years old, and the only trade he had was being priced out from under him by a company he would later learn his own wife had invested his own money into. That was the year Cheryl stopped pretending. And on a wet Tuesday in April, 3 weeks after his birthday, Art came home to a kitchen table with divorce papers on it, and his old army duffel sitting by the door like a body. She was wearing new perfume. She'd had her hair done. Behind her on the counter sat 2 glasses of wine, and only one of them was hers, and it still wasn't his. Sign them, Cheryl said. Everything's already gone, Art. It's been gone for 2 years. You never even checked. Gordon says a man who doesn't watch his money doesn't deserve to keep it. Art looked at the papers a long time, then at the duffel. He asked her one question. 31 years of marriage, and he asked only one thing. Was any of it real? And Cheryl Kimbrell looked at the man who had fixed strangers' shoes for $11 so she could have the good kitchen. And she said, "You're a small man who fixes small things. I got tired of being one of them. Rot alone, Art. Die in hell." He signed. That's the part people in Halbert still can't believe. He didn't fight, didn't hire the lawyer his customers begged him to hire. He signed everything, picked up the duffel, and walked out into the rain, and the door of his own house clicked shut behind him like a rifle bolt. What nobody knew, not Cheryl, not Spear, not one soul in Halbert, was that Art Kimbrell had spent 35 years being nobody on purpose. And men like that don't fight over houses. They had a saying, in the unit he never mentioned, from a sergeant whose name he still couldn't say out loud: you don't argue with the minefield. You just walk your lane, and you keep walking. The first month was the Starlight Motor Inn, $42 a night until the cash envelope from behind the workbench ran out. The second month was his truck, a 1998 F-150 with 260,000 miles, parked behind the Baptist church because the pastor pretended not to notice. He was 58, and he learned what every man his age prays he never learns: that nobody hires you, that the applications go into a hole, that a lifetime of skill weighs less than a checkbox. He interviewed to fix boots at a chain store, and a 26-year-old manager told him he wasn't a culture fit. Art thanked him and shook his hand, because Bud Larrabee used to say, courtesy is free and pride is expensive. He ate one meal a day, then most days. He got thin in the face. He kept his boots clean, that he would always keep, and at night, in the truck bed under a tarp, he lay listening to the rain and did what he had done every night since February 26, 1991. He counted to 31. Slowly, by name, the ones he still had, and by number the rest. It was the only prayer he knew that worked. Because here is what the duffel held, wrapped in a gun sock, under 2 shirts and a shaving kit: a silver star, a bronze star, a purple heart, an Army Commendation Medal, and a folded triangle of desert tan cloth that he had never once unfolded since the day a chaplain pressed it into his hands. In 1991, Arthur Kimbrell had been a 23-year-old specialist, a combat engineer attached to a support convoy in the Gulf. What happened to that convoy on the night of February 25th had a general order number and a classification stamp, and 31 survivors, and for 35 years Art had told exactly no one. Not the VA, where he'd never filed a claim. Not Cheryl, who thought the duffel held army junk. He had walked out of the desert, finished his enlistment, hung up the uniform, and vanished into a cobbler's bench in a town where nobody asks. Because the last thing Bud Larrabee ever ordered him to do, Art had never figured out how to obey. Go be somebody, kid, Bud had said, on his back in the sand with his hands going cold in Art's hands. Go be somebody. Instead, Art had gone and been nobody. Carefully, thoroughly, for 35 years. By the second week of June, he was down to $11.25 tank, and his body made the decision his pride wouldn't. There was a pawn shop in Cardwell, 2 towns over, where nobody knew his face. Petrakis Loan and Estate, EST, 1979, gold letters on green, a Marine Corps flag in the window below the American one. Art sat in the truck across the street for 1 full hour. Then he carried his medals in a paper bag, the way you carry a thing you can't look at. The man behind the counter was about 40, built like a wrestler gone comfortable, with a black beard and Usmik forearm ink. Ray Petrakis, second generation, ran the shop his father built. He'd bought 100 medals off 100 desperate men, and he hated it every time. And he did it because a pawn ticket keeps a man's dignity on layaway. And Ray always held the military stuff back from the sales floor, in a drawer, in case they came back. Ray looked at the tremble in the big man's hands and did the math pawnbrokers do. Not on the medal, on the man. I can do 90, Ray said gently. It's what he could tell the register. Art nodded once. He took the $90, 3 20s, 2 10s, a 5 and 5 1s, and he was already turning toward the door, already deciding it would be gas and not food, when Ray, filling out the ticket, turned the silver star over to note the engraving. The shop went very quiet. On the reverse, in machine engraving gone soft with handling, SPC Arthur D. Kimbrell, Go 3191. Ray Petrakis read it twice. Then he set the medal down on the felt pad like it was live ordnance, and he stood up slowly. And Art heard the change in the room and stopped with his hand on the door. Sir. Ray's voice had gone strange. Sir, this citation number. Go 3191. He came around the counter. My father told me about this mission his whole life. Every February since I was 6 years old. He said their convoy got lost in a storm inside a minefield, and the sky was on fire, and one man, got 31 soldiers out alive, and then disappeared before the ceremony. They never found him to thank him. 35 years, sir. My dad's number is 17. Art Kimbrell stood in the doorway of a pawn shop with $90 in his fist and 35 years of silence breaking up inside his chest like river ice. You've got the wrong man, he said, which is what he had decided in 1992 he would say, and it came out in pieces. Ray walked past him, flipped the sign to closed, and locked the front door of his own shop with a customer inside it. Then he took out his phone, and his hands were shaking worse than Art's had been. Dad, he said. Dad, you need to sit down. He's standing in the shop. Number 32. Dad, the engineer. He's alive. He's here. Dad, he just tried to pawn the Silver Star for gas money. Through the phone, from a kitchen in Cardwell, Art heard an old man begin to weep in Greek. They brought Costa Petrakis to the shop within the hour. 64 years old, on oxygen from the oil fire smoke he'd breathed in 91 that had been chewing his lungs ever since. And when the old motor sergeant saw Art's face, he came up off the wheelchair against every doctor's order he had, stood at attention, and saluted him with tears running into his mustache. Lane Walker, Costa said. First man in the lane. 35 years we look for you. 35 years, and you walk into my boy's shop. And then, because the body keeps its own books, Art Kimbrell, who had not cried at his own wedding, or his own ruin, sat down on the floor of a pawn shop in Cardwell, Missouri, and covered his face with his hands. To understand what happened next, you have to go back to the night itself. February 25th, 1991. The ground war was hours old, and the sky was black at noon. Saddam's forces had fired the oil fields, and a Shamal wind was dragging the smoke and sand into a wall you could not see your own hand through. A support convoy, fuelers, medics, mechanics, cooks, 38 vehicles of the kind of soldiers who keep an army alive and never get movies made about them, took a wrong azimuth in the murk and drifted off the cleared route into an uncharted Iraqi minefield. The lead truck found the first mine the hard way. Then artillery, registered on that field for exactly this purpose, began to walk in. Attached to that convoy were 2 combat engineers. One of them, Sergeant First Class Bud Larrabee, 41, a Tennessee man who called everyone kid, including the battalion commander. The other was his shadow, a 23-year-old specialist from Missouri that Larrabee had been raising like a stray since Fort Leonard Wood. The convoy was 33 souls by then. Some vehicles had made the turn, some hadn't. 33 people frozen in a field of pressure plates, in zero visibility, with steel coming down. No mine detector worth anything in that soup. No engineer vehicle. What Larrabee and Kimbrell had was 2 bayonets, a spool of white engineer tape, and the oldest technique in the book. You get on your belly, and you probe the sand by hand, an inch at a time, at an angle, 10,000 times, and you mark a lane, and people walk out of hell in single file, stepping only where you have already bet your life it's safe. They probed for 9 hours. 2 men, taking turns on point, on their stomachs, in the dark, while the wind tried to bury the tape behind them, and the shells came impatient and random like the footsteps of something huge. 9 hours. 400 meters. Art's fingertips were bleeding through his gloves by hour 3. He found mines with his knuckles, with his wrist once, close enough to read the manufacturer's stamp. Twice the artillery found the convoy behind them, and men screamed, and the medics did what medics do, and the wounded had to be carried out down the lane. So Art walked it again, and again, a wounded man over his shoulders, 13 trips, counting his own footprints in the dark. At hour 9, with the far edge of the field close enough to smell, clean sand, no metal, Bud Larrabee pulled his rank one last time. Kid's done, he said. Old man's turn to walk first. 90 seconds later, a shell dropped short, and the blast lifted the world, and the mine it flung Bud onto did the rest. 33 had gone into that field. 1 had died in the artillery early on, a 19-year-old fueler whose name Art also counted at night. And Bud. 31 walked out down the tape, single file, hands on shoulders, out of the smoke and into the history that never got written, because the convoy had been 11 kilometers somewhere it officially wasn't, on a night the maps still lie about. The battalion put Art in for the Medal of Honor before his fingers had healed. The paperwork went up, and then the classification came down, and the recommendation went into a sealed annex to wait for a war's secrets to expire. They pinned an interim Silver Star on him at a ceremony inside a hangar with no press, and the Army, in its way, said, "Someday." And Specialist Kimbrell nodded and finished his enlistment shaving around a face he couldn't look at, because the math never stopped screaming at him. Bud took point at hour 9, minute 1. If Art had argued for 90 more seconds, the shell falls on an empty lane. He didn't want a medal, he wanted hour 9 back. So when his discharge came in 92, he did the thing shattered men did before the internet. He went home to Missouri, quietly changed towns, filed nothing with the VA, touched nothing with his name on it, and learned a trade where you sit with your back to a wall and mend what's broken with your hands. The Army looked for him twice in the 90s when annexes began to unseal. By then, Arthur D. Kimbrell was paying cash, renting under a friend's name, and married to a woman who thought the scar tissue on his fingertips was from a fishing accident. The 31 never stopped looking. That was the first thing Costa told him, in the back room of the pawn shop, with Ray pouring coffee nobody drank. They'd formed something at Fort Hood before they all scattered. Not a club exactly, more like a congregation. The 31. Every February 26th, wherever they were, they met. First in person, then by phone, now on a video call with grandchildren wandering through the frame. And they read the 2 names of the dead, and they set an empty chair, one single chair, for the living man they couldn't find. Each of them carried a brass token, machined by number 11, who ran a tool and die shop in Ohio. Number 1 through number 31, stamped on one face in the order they'd walked out of the lane. On the other face, all 31 tokens said the same thing. Go 3191. Walk your lane. And there was one more thing, and Costa's hands shook when he got to it, and it wasn't the emphysema. You must know this secret, Costa said. 35 years we keep it. Every one of us, every month, since 1991, we put money away. For you. Doesn't matter it was $5. Doesn't matter it was $500. Judge Tasker, she was the ambulance driver, kid. She's a federal judge now. She made it legal. A trust. It has a name. The Lane Fund. 35 years, 31 families, and the compounding, Arthur. The old man took a hit of oxygen and laughed and cried at once. $5.1 million. It was never a question if we find you. Only when. Art said what he'd say every single time the fund came up for the next 4 months. I can't take money for that night. And Costa Petrakis leaned forward, took Art's ruined fingertips in his hands like relics, and said the sentence they'd all been saving for 35 years. It was never charity, Lane Walker. It's toll. Every step any of us take since 1991, we walk it on your road. Ray made the second call that evening, to a number the 31 kept updated the way churches keep a phone tree. Terrell Swopes, number 4, who'd built a trucking company in Memphis out of the second chance, and who had a personal rule that no man tells him found him over voicemail. By midnight, the video call had 26 squares in it. 26, because 5 of the 31 had died in the intervening years, their chairs filled tonight by wives and sons holding brass tokens to the camera. 26 faces looking at a thin cobbler blinking in the light of Ray's laptop, and not one of them could speak first. Until Reverend Cleet Monday, number 22, a Little Rock preacher with a voice like a diesel, finally managed, well, the chair's warm at last. Hallelujah. And 900 miles east, in an office at the Pentagon, a phone rang after hours, because a federal judge named Ione Tasker knew exactly which office to wake up. The call was logged at 9:14 p.m. by the Army's awards branch. The log entry, later framed, reads, Subject, Go 31-91. The engineer has been located. Colonel Marguerite Chow had held the awards portfolio for 6 years, and the sealed annex file with the ribboned folder inside it was famous in her office the way an unclaimed lottery ticket is famous. The classification had expired in 2011. The award, approved, signed, funded, had sat in legal limbo for 15 more years, for one reason. The United States Army could not find Arthur D. Kimbrell. No VA file. No credit file worth anything. No address. Investigators had twice declared him probably deceased. Twice, someone in the 31 had refused to let the file close, writing letters, calling congressmen. Once, this was Swopes, driving to Washington and sitting in a waiting room for 9 hours with a brass token on his knee. They've been holding something for you at the Pentagon, Ray had told Art that first afternoon, repeating what his father had drilled into him like scripture. For 35 years. Dad always said, the day we find him, the Army owes him a ceremony, and we intend to collect. Verification took the summer. DNA against his own 1990 in-processing records, fingerprints, Arts made the technician wince, all that scar tissue. Sworn affidavits from 26 survivors whose accounts had not drifted apart in 35 years, which the historian said almost never happens, unless people have been retelling it together every February, like liturgy. While the Army worked, so did the town gossip. And here the story turns, because Halbert is small, and Cheryl Spear, she'd taken the name fast, heard exactly one version of it. Art had come into money, some veteran thing, some fund. The amount grew with every retelling, the way amounts do. And by August, at the club, over the good Chardonnay, Gordon Spear set down his glass mid-sentence and said the word he always said when he smelled unprotected money near a flag. Veterans Fund? What Veterans Fund? You need to understand what Gordon Spear's firm actually was, because the billboard said protect, and the paperwork said devour. Patriot Legacy Advisors helped aging veterans and widows unlock the value of their pensions, buying, through shell entities, a man's $2,100 a month military or union pension for a lump sum advance worth 40 cents on the dollar, wrapped in fees, hidden in annuity contracts a tax lawyer couldn't unwind. It's called pension poaching. It is real. It circles every base town in America like gulls, and Spear was good at it. 3 states, 9 years, 600 families. Deidre Fallon, his office manager, kept 2 sets of files. The glossy ones clients saw, and the drawer she privately called the graveyard. The complaints, the clawbacks, the elderly men signing with shaking hands. Deidre had a Marine grandfather and an acid stomach and had been telling herself for 2 years that she was only the bookkeeper. And one of the 600 families, Art learned this on the same September afternoon he learned what a deposition was Petrakis. Costa's Terrasso Layers Union pension, bought in 2019 for a lump sum that was gone in 18 months of medical bills, which is why a 64-year-old man on oxygen still did the pawn shop's books at night, and why the shop that had quietly returned 100 medals to 100 broke veterans was itself 2 bad months from the wall. Spear had already bled number 17, and now, sniffing after rumors of Art's windfall, Gordon Spear aimed his firm at the 31, cold-called 2 of them in 1 week with the Eagle brochure, Veterans Legacy Roundtable, complimentary steak dinner, bring your service records. He had no idea what he was calling. The 31 held a video call that night, and it was Judge Ione Tasker, number 9, the ambulance driver, 34 years on the federal bench, a woman who interrupted exactly no one until she did, who summed up the temperature of the room. Gentlemen, this man has been hunting our kind for 9 years, and he has just walked into our field. I move we mark him a lane. Art Kimbrell sat very still at the edge of the frame, in the pawn shop's back room that had become his headquarters and, over Ray's furious objections, his rented bedroom, he paid. Some men you cannot stop from paying. Then the cobbler spoke, and 26 squares went quiet. Everybody freezes, Art said. Nobody moves off the tape. I'll walk first. Here's what the trap looked like, because it was a combat engineer's trap. Patient, invisible, and built entirely out of the enemy's own forward motion. Judge Tasker made one call, recusing herself from everything, and connecting the club to a man named Truman Pollard, who ran a Justice Department elder fraud task force out of St. Louis and had been circling Patriot Legacy for 2 years, with a file full of smoke and no fire. Pollard needed 3 things he'd never gotten: a pristine victim walking in wired from day 1, a look inside the shells, and someone in the building with the real books. The 31 gave him all 3 inside a month. The bait was the Lane Fund itself, $5.1 million, dangled in exactly the shape Spear dreamed about at night. An aging veterans memorial trust, administered by some retired trucker in Memphis. Looking, said the rumor Swopes let slip at a Legion Hall Spear's scout was known to fish in, for professional management. Terrell Swopes then spent 3 recorded lunches being the richest naive man in Tennessee, asking Spear's people questions like whether $5 million was too much to keep in one place, and mentioning, twice, gift-wrapped, that the beneficiary was a 58-year-old with no financial sophistication whatsoever. A cobbler, if you can believe it. Spear took the hook so hard he drove to Missouri himself, and on October the 9th, in a glass conference room in Clayton, with the eagle logo etched on the door. Gordon Spear pitched the whole machine: the pension purchase, disguised as a legacy annuity, the fee cascade, the shell in Delaware, the arbitration clause that made suing pointless, his voice warm as a fireplace, his flag pinned straight. To the new client his people had vetted as the fund's simple, lucky beneficiary. A quiet, thin man in a clean flannel shirt who shook hands like dock rope, gave his real name, Arthur Kimbrell, and asked slow, careful questions for 90 minutes. Art had been many things: specialist, lane walker, ghost, cobbler. But that afternoon he gave the performance of his life, because stillness was the one thing he had never once run out of, and every word landed on the recorder taped under his shirt, 6 inches from the scar tissue. "One thing I don't understand, Mr. Spear," Art said at last, apologetic, halting. "My wife, my ex-wife, her husband does what you do. Spear, Gordon Spear. A beat. Oh, that's you, isn't it? Small world." And Gordon Spear, who had stolen this man's wife, his house, his shop building, and his savings without ever once learning his face, leaned back in his $2,000 chair, smiled the billboard smile, and said the sentence prosecutors would later play 4 times for the jury. "Small world, warrior. Tell you what, for family, I'll waive the onboarding fee. We'll take real good care of you. It's what you people deserve." Deidre Fallon walked into the St. Louis Federal Building 11 days later, carrying the graveyard drawer in 2 banker's boxes. Having decided, she told Pollard that she was done being only the bookkeeper. The FBI executed warrants on Patriot Legacy advisors on a gray Tuesday in November. 3 offices, 9 shells, the lake house. The indictment ran to 41 counts: mail fraud, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft. Among the frozen assets, seized as instruments and proceeds of the scheme, an LLC whose holdings included a certain building on Decatur Street in Halbert, and a house, the one whose kitchen had heard rot alone, die in hell, which Cheryl had triumphantly kept in the divorce, and then, on Gordon's advice, deeded into Gordon's family protection vehicle for tax purposes. She got the news in her driveway, watching 2 agents in windbreakers photograph the front door. The prenup Gordon insisted on turned out to be the only competent legal document in her life. She was a witness, not a wife, by New Year's. Spear's attorneys made that arrangement almost gallantly fast, and she moved into a rented room above the nail salon on Route 9, where the television worked fine, which mattered, because of what the television showed in April. It showed the Hall of Heroes. The Army had offered the White House. Art asked for the smaller room, and the Army, which by then would have given him the building, understood exactly why when he explained it. "I want everybody in one room, close, like the lane." They flew all of them in. 26 survivors of the convoy, and the families of the 5 who'd passed, and the family of the 19-year-old fueler, and Bud Laraby's widow, 81 years old, straight as tape, who had asked to be seated front row center, and to hold, in her lap, folded, Bud's original engineer tape recovered from the field in '91. The Army had kept that too. Ray Petrakis closed the shop, closed for family business, the sign said, and pushed his father's wheelchair up the ramp, and in Costa's lap rode a small green felt board, and mounted on it, 4 medals, redeemed in full. A pawn ticket marked paid, stapled to its corner, because the old man had insisted the ticket come too. "The $90 stays in the story," Costa said. "The story is the medal." The citation for the Medal of Honor of Specialist Arthur D. Kimbrell, United States Army, ran 4 minutes and 11 seconds read aloud. The room heard about the storm, and the wrong azimuth, and the artillery walking in the dark. It heard about 400 meters cleared by hand, an inch at a time, over 9 hours. It heard about 13 trips down the lane under fire with wounded soldiers across his shoulders. Where the citation said, "Conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty," 26 graying men and women mouthed the words along with the reader like a hymn they'd been rehearsing for 35 years, because they had been. When the president stepped back from the blue ribbon, the protocol officer announced the reception, and nobody moved because Costa Petrakis was getting up. Off the oxygen, off the chair, 64 years old and burning his whole day's breath on it. Number 17 stood at attention and raised the salute he'd been holding since a pawn shop in June. And then 25 more stood, and the sons and widows of the 5 stood holding brass tokens over their heads, and the room came apart. The photograph of that half-second, the cobbler in the black suit, hand over his heart, ruined fingertips flat on his chest, one tear, first row of a wall of saluting gray heads, ran on every front page in America, and hangs today in 2 places, the Pentagon's awards branch, and above the register of a pawnshop in Cardwell, Missouri. As for the secret, the one the 31 had kept for 35 years, Art finally answered them at the reception, with Judge Tasker standing by with the trust documents like a woman who had waited long enough. He would accept the Lane Fund, all of it, and spend none of it on himself. It reopened the shop on Decatur Street that summer, the building bought outright at the government's forfeiture auction, Spears' Eagle sign coming down the same afternoon the new one went up. Larrabee's, the new sign says, and under it, smaller, boots, leather, and second chances. It is a cobbler's shop, and a free boot and gear counter for any veteran with a DD 214 and a bad month, and 4 paid apprentice benches where homeless vets learn a trade that doesn't care about your credit score, with Costa Petrakis, on oxygen, supervising quality control like a tyrant every Tuesday. The Lane Fund pays for all of it forever. Tasker structured it that way. Over the door, where other shops put "Sorry, we're closed," there's a strip of white engineer tape and a brass plate, "Walk your lane." Art Kimbrell still opens at 7. He still fixes work boots for $11. Sometimes a customer looks too long at the framed pawn ticket by the register, $90 paid, and asks about it, and Art says what he always says. "A friend held something for me while I was lost." Cheryl wrote him twice from the room over the nail salon. The letters sit unopened in a drawer, not out of cruelty. Art doesn't have the gear for cruelty, but because, as he told Ray the night before the trial, some fields you don't walk back into. There's nothing in them you need. He testified for 2 hours in the spring, plain as a manual, and Gordon Spear, warrior-in-chief of Patriot Legacy Advisors, drew 22 years in federal prison, restitution ordered to 611 families. His name now the actual textbook example in 2 states' elder fraud statutes. Number 17's pension was among the first made whole. And on February 26th of next year, for the 36th time and the first time, the 31 met with no empty chair. They put Art at the head of the table. He tried to sit somewhere in the middle. They have 31 brass tokens worth of reasons why he never will. So that's the story. And here's what I keep circling back to. Cheryl looked at a quiet man for 31 years and decided quiet meant small. Gordon Spear looked at 10,000 veterans and saw the same thing. Small, slow, trusting, harvestable. Both of them made the exact same mistake about the exact same man, and it cost them everything, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think contempt is a kind of blindness that always finds a minefield eventually. Here's the part that's real, by the way. Pension poaching is not something I invented for drama. Firms like Spears exist right now, circling every base town in America, buying $2,000 a month pensions for pennies wrapped in a flag. If you've got a veteran in your family, especially an older one, have the awkward money conversation. Tonight. And one more thing. That man in your life who never talks about what he did, who sits where he can see the door, who seems content fixing small broken things. Check on him. Buy him coffee. Ask him nothing. Just sit there, because the quietest man in the room might be counting to 31 every night, and some medals spend 35 years in a drawer at the Pentagon waiting for someone to finally come home. If this one got you, share it with somebody who'd understand it. I'm Nathan. Walk your lane. Good night.